across the world and different backgrounds. So that's actually quite nice. DAI, as you may know, is a global company implementing development aid, and so supporting different actors in implementing specific programs and projects, including in response to COVID. And ECDPM is a think tank working on sustainable development and with a particular focus on Africa. And in this context, also sort of reflecting on the implications of COVID and possible responses, which led us to the organization of this webinar series, of which this is the first one, which is about connecting public and private responses to COVID and its impact on global development. We've called this, and we want this to be practical webinars. COVID is having an enormous impact. We all know that, and not least in emerging and developing countries. Look only at the report that World Bank issued last week, the Prospect Report, which talks about the greatest recession since World War II, and also particular heavy implications in emerging economies and developing countries. And so public and private actors are grappling with how to respond and how to support certain actors, and coming up with different types of initiatives to do so. And what we want to do in these webinars is actually highlight and discuss really new initiatives and approaches in the context of COVID. So how are different actors, including governments and development partners, what are they putting in place in response to COVID? Also in light of, one example is obviously the EU, the communication that the EU has come out with on the global EU response to COVID, which leads to practical implementation. This is just one actor, but that's the context. We'll talk about we'll cover different topics in these webinars. Next week it's about digitalization, the week after, same day, also Monday, same time, on financing, the week after on June 29, and on the 6th of July on health, with a focus on health. But today we will focus, as you know, on MSMEs, so strengthening MSMEs for economic resilience and sustainable development. SMEs are the backbones of many economies. It accounts for over 90% of businesses worldwide and over 50% of total employment worldwide. So it's worth paying particular attention to, not only because of their importance, but also because of their particular vulnerability in this crisis, for various reasons. An important one being limited financial resources and borrowing capacity, so not a lot of resistance to tackle the crisis, but also a disproportionate presence in economic sectors that have been affected heavily by COVID, such as retail, hospitality, and high rates of informality, which makes them particularly vulnerable. Not all, MSMEs were already facing challenges in pre-COVID, but this has certainly worsened with the economic impact of COVID, which then in turn risks the livelihoods of many, or the income of many households. So there is clearly a need for public and private actors, ecosystem actors, to step in and support MSMEs, both in the short term, preventing companies simply to go bankrupt, but also more structural, mid and longer term recovery measures. And this is also something that we at ECDPM work quite a bit on. It's not only to sort of support companies, but also support them in a socially and environmentally sustainable way. We all heard probably the term building back better. So to what extent can these support measures actually take into account and promote business models towards a greener economy, think of workers' rights, etc. So this is also something that we will cover in this in this webinar. So I'm very happy that we have different speakers who will present different examples from different countries that we want to sort of draw lessons from or learn from, covering the Palestinian territories, Cameroon, Kenya, Uganda, and Tunisia, and presenting both public as well as private sector initiatives, and also interesting sort of the dialogue between the public-private sector and joint initiatives. So that's what the speakers will cover, and you'll also see it'll cover both certain new initiatives as well as sort of adaptation of existing initiatives or fast-tracking some other initiatives that were already in the pipeline. We have a distinguished panel or list of speakers, which I'm happy to have with us. This includes Saeed Abouidjeh, the DAI country director of the Palestinian territories, Eric Eloundou Ngah, who is a board member of the Cameroon Business Patronage Movement, E.CAM. Then we have Ms. Carole Karuga, who is CEO of the Kenyan Private Sector Organization, Association, KEPSA. And finally, we have Emmanuel Moyart, who also worked for DAI as team leader of a technical facility at DEFCO, the European Commission. So we'll have these speakers present briefly some initiatives. I encourage you to ask questions, and as Chris has told you, you can do so in the Q&A function. I will pick up on some of these questions and pose them to the speakers. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to ask them all for you, but I'll try my best to filter specific themes that you want to further elaboration on. So please don't hesitate and put your questions in the Q&A function. And then let me turn actually to the first speaker, Mr. Saeed, from talking about the Palestinian territories, and he will talk about rapid COVID-19 response intervention, which of the World Bank. Yeah, we're happy to hear about what are the particular challenges there, and how does this program, how has it come about, and how does it function, and some of the key insights we have from this new initiative. Saeed, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good day, everybody. I will just give a couple of dates that the COVID-19, the lockdown of West Bank and Gaza was on March 23rd, and the ease of restrictions started 40 days later, but the whole country now is open, private and public sector. But we talk about 2 months of lockdown on SMEs. Palestine in nature has more than 95% of businesses are SMEs. Now, the 2 months have a lot of effect on SMEs, and the reality is, as you know, that recession, that the world is going into a recession, and this recession encapsulates small economies, which Palestine is one of them. And this forced private sector to start looking for local opportunities to survive. Also, the shift is accelerating rapidly in digital transformation of private sector organization, as well as driving others into fine-tuning their business models and the products to adapt to the demand, the new demand. The other thing is that this pandemic to small businesses were like a surprise. Mainly their cash flow is badly affected, and the way their plans are going was went in array. Now, the general statements which apply to us is unemployment went skyrocketed, and people are working to minimum hours. And the most important thing that affects businesses is the demand side was shifted to essential spending. Now, all those factors played into the SMEs. Now, what do I have on the ground? Next slide. What we have is 2 projects. I mean, it's a coincidence, Both projects are financed by the World Bank as a trust fund. The first one called Innovative Private Sector Development Project, which is again with the Ministry of National Economy. Its main focus was empowering Palestinian economy through developing private sector with a focus on entrepreneurship, startups, and MSMEs. And the other one is called Finance for Job, which is another trust fund with the World Bank for the Ministry of Finance. And it targets testing the effectiveness of selected financial interventions, including development impact bonds, matching grants, and de-risking some of the major investments that have high social and economic returns. Now, these two projects were pre-COVID, and as COVID started, the discussion started with both ministries and the World Bank, and we are stayed in contact with Palestinian private sector institutions and firms that within our portfolio. Again, I want to remind you that these two projects were pre-COVID. Therefore, an adjustment to those mechanisms was the first choice for both government and the World Bank to quickly respond to the impact, mainly on SMEs. Next slide, please. Now, the end result of our discussion and consultation was that we need to respond to the sudden abnormal market dynamics that badly affected most of the SMEs that we have. The new feature of this program, because DAI is implementing both and both are affected to government and the same donor, it was easy for us to look at both projects together and see what can we do to respond to the immediate need of the small and medium enterprises and even startups under these conditions. What we came up with is what we refer to as working capital bridge grant, where we offer those SMEs two types of support. One is financial in a form of grant, and the other one is basically mentoring and training and coaching programs to enable survival and continuity. So our program tackles both the soft side, the soft skills, and also supporting the working capital to improve the possibility of success of those SMEs. Next. Now, just to give an idea of how we define SMEs, because everybody is an SME and you cannot put a program that you can service everybody and fairly quickly. We focus, as you see, on the smaller ones when it comes to SMEs with annual turnover of more than 500, but less than 1.5 million, and the full-time employees is less than 30. The second category is startups with annual turnover less than 500 and full-time employees less than 15, and it has to be established after 2008, no later than 6 months prior to the launch of the program. Again, those are a big group, so what we suggested and what we call for our application is we are looking for innovative technology and business models. And those are the ones that we will invest in and we will support. And the way we define innovative or innovation-based definition of Oslo manual for those who know it. And so we're looking at SMEs that has product innovation or process innovation or marketing innovation or organizational innovation. Now, as they fill their applications, we're going to filter those who have who meet the first criteria, but also have something that we can invest in so that we don't lose when they don't have enough resources. Next slide, please. Now, the unique attributes of our program, which is Working Capital Bridge Grant. In the financial support, we offer in-kind grants, and people might ask, it's difficult to handle, where we are going to pay directly to the suppliers and to the staff. What you cover under in-kind grant is basically salaries, rent, and limited IT equipment and software. And the way we choose to do it is through in-kind grants. And it's a little bit of a burden on us, but we thought that to ensure that the resources goes to the employees and the suppliers and firms doesn't have the option of having some resources, we will respond immediately to their needs through providing them with that in-kind grant. And the ceiling is $24,000 per firm, and it goes for 3 months. So we define a clear objective of the firms that we are after, and we define the way we are going to support them. And because DI has a very robust delivery and disbursement mechanisms on the ground, we choose that option to ensure that employees get at least that portion of support that we give to them. On the non-financial side, we are going to conduct a lot of webinars and seminars and coaching and to enable those businesses that we choose to support for adaptation and mitigation and to help their continuity. And there will be most of those will be online or through contacts with our business advisors who exist in many countries, in many regions. One last thing that I would say that this is a problem that cannot be addressed by one project. There is other donors also who are looking at interventions that will mitigate the risk of SMEs and enable them to get back to work through different means. Also, the private sector has done a fund to support mainly workers who doesn't have job and those who returned used to work in Israel and now they don't have jobs. So there is a collaborative effort to try to support a government with limited resources to support private sector. I will stop at this point and I will be happy to answer any question you may have.
Thank you very much, Saeed. This is very insightful. It's also interesting to hear that you were insisting that this is an existing program and you tried, or there's an effort to adapt it and add a new initiative in the context of those programs. And I was also intrigued by the fact that you said that it's in kind in the sense that it goes directly to employees and suppliers actually, rather than to the firm under the conditions that they keep that they keep employees or pay suppliers, but it actually goes directly to them, which I think is also an interesting feature. I haven't seen questions come in. I hope that that's not a technical issues. I do encourage you, if you have any question, to post them, but it gives me the flexibility to ask a question for clarification. Saeed, you sort of explained that it's both financial support, short-term, and non-financial support, including coaching, training, and mentoring for companies to be better equipped to survive the crisis. Can you say a bit more about then what that coaching, training, mentoring implies? Is that specifically tailored to some of the COVID-related challenges? Can you say a bit more about that?
There is companies that already started adjusting to fill the market gaps of some products. Some of them are for health related, and those will be considered innovative. But the kind of areas that we identified as a potential support for this is SMEs who have innovative ideas are budgeting and forecasting, because some of them, with our support, will need additional resources for growth, business planning, and then product development, and then operational performance. So we picked areas that are in general needed, but above all is risk mitigation and business continuity. We would like also to see those firms, because Corona did not finish by a government decision, and we would like to support them how to operate their current business operation and future expanded ones safe and having less risk of Corona spread within those facilities too.
Thank you, Saeed. We have a question that came in on sort of restrictions due to COVID, sort of lockdown restrictions, and to what extent they affect, or do you think they will affect your training programs? Because maybe, Saeed, you can also say something about the phase that you're in this program. So have the training and the financial support started already? And then if you could tackle this question on sort of to what extent are the restrictions affecting your program?
I mean, we anticipate that restrictions will be are expected partially for COVID, but also the government right now has opened up the country and people can move easily and businesses, most of it are working. Still, we have pockets of corona and limited scale. So there is things related to lockdown due to corona, but also in Palestine, I mean, we are on a roller coaster. I mean, we have been locked down for many, many years and in different reasons. So we rely on the resilience of the private sector and on our ability to provide some of the services that we offer through multiple suppliers that we identify in different localities. And also, still Gaza is a challenge, and we have limitations there. But our program and our mechanisms that we deploy have taken that into consideration. I tend to say this is not an easy journey to support SMEs under those conditions, but we are going to, as much as possible, be creative in the way we support and in the way we develop business. Palestine has a very strong IT infrastructure and telecom infrastructure. Internet is available in most of the houses and most of the businesses at affordable price. And we will rely on technology as much as we can.
Thank you very much. Maybe a last question, and I want to move on to the next speaker. What are the criteria for supporting the startups and the SMEs? Is one of the questions from the audience.
Well, we have a very clear criteria, but I describe at least two of the main features. The size is what qualify you to apply. I mean, the size of the SME, less than 1.5 million and less than 30 employees. That's the first filter. The second filter is we developed through the application form a process where we want really to make sure that the business that we are supporting has high growth potential, and his problem is really coming because of the effect of corona, and that he has an innovative product or innovative service or innovative market idea, and that he's willing himself and confident of his business. Now the criteria has, as I said, multi-points. There is a metrics for evaluation, but businesses need to meet the minimum requirements that give us a confidence that this investment will continue. It's not a giveaway. It is not something that open-ended in terms of resources and availability. Therefore, we would like to be strategic about our choices and about the impact that we will get after sustaining those businesses.
Thank you very much, Saeed. And just to clarify, this is the application. It's open for companies to apply now, right? You're in this phase, yes. And then the disbursements will be soon.
Yes, and people can get it, by the way, if interested to look at what we did. For any value, it can be seen under ibsd.ps, www.ibsd.ps. All the application criteria and methods are available for information. ibsd.ps.
Thank you very much, Saeed. I would then like to go to our next distinguished speaker from another continent, namely Cameroon, from the private sector, Eloundou Ngah, as I said, board member of the Cameroon Business Patronage Movement, called E.CAM, on the creation of a guarantee scheme for SMEs in Cameroon, and actually a guarantee scheme in combination with other types of support, which is an initiative that E.CAM is promoting. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you, Jeske, for giving me the floor. So my presentation is divided into three parts. but I will not insist on the background of Cameroonian economy because it's, as well you said, and Said said it too, the economic is...
Eric, sorry for disturbing, but it sounds very soft, so I don't know, can you come a bit closer to the mic? Maybe that helps.
Can you hear me? Is it okay?
It's far better now. Yes.
Okay. So for the first part of my presentation, I will first say that Cameroonians' economic situation, like all of the sub-Saharan countries, is was in structural crisis before COVID-19. If we consider the overall objective of sustainable development. So the optimistic economic growth forecast announced at the beginning of 2020 are currently being called into question by a series of shocks, including COVID-19 pandemic. But apart from that, we also have other issues like the fall in hydrocarbon prices, following the disagreement between the main producers on production quotas and the instability of financial markets. Concerning specifically the hydrocarbon here in Central Africa, we have more than 5 on 6 countries which are very dependent on that hydrocarbon. So the impact of COVID crisis is very hard for all that country. But apart from that, the biggest challenge that we are facing in the Central Africa is that the economic fabric of these countries remains deeply fractured with, on one hand, a formal sector on which most of state economic performance and tax revenue are based, even though it employs less than 10% of working population. And in the other hand, we have an informal sector whose economic performance is beyond the control of the central administration and whose employs more than 90% of working population. So this fracture between informal and formal sector is another element that should be managed for the COVID crisis. In the other hand, concerning the background of Cameroon, you also have a deep imbalance between the 3 production sectors, and you will find a very important imbalance between the third sector and the first sector, where you have a contribution of less than 1% on the global GDP, and the second sector is contributed less than 15%. So you have the third sectors with specifically commercial activities, which represent 94% of the global production of the country. So this is a very big weakness for specifically Cameroonian economy, but it's the same case for all the countries of the sub-Saharan Africa. So as the response of the COVID-19, our patronage movement, E.CAM, suggested 4 propositions. The first one is the establishment of a consultation framework that will permit to centralize the results of COVID business impact study, specifically on SMEs, because we are focusing on SMEs issue. The second solution is, the second proposition is the creation of a sovereign guarantee fund with a minimum of 1,000 billion CFA, knowing that we have here a very hard issue for SMEs getting in funding with the banks. The third one is the reduction of tax burden. And for the moment, is the only proposal that has been implemented by the government as a solution to respond to COVID impact. And the last proposal is the establishment of an assistance mechanism for households covering their consumption needs in terms of goods, health, transport, communication, water, electricity, and so on. This last proposal is, as we present to the government, an opportunity to develop the local production, knowing that since the COVID crisis began, it's very difficult to import or export produce out of the country. So we are trying in the new proposal to develop the local production. So as a solution, we had the first experience of mutual guarantee fund in 2018, and we are trying now to bring it to all the value chain activities, because the first experience was only on the construction value chain. But regarding the COVID-19 crisis, we are with the pressure of the government obliged now to go further and to create a mutual guarantee fund for the whole activities that are already in process in Cameroon. The mutual guarantee fund is based on 4 pillars. The first one is at macroeconomic level, and will help to structuring the SMEs into value chain. The second pillar at the microeconomic level will help to upgrade the SMEs and to train SMEs manager. As we just heard now, we have coaching, training, and monitoring activities. The third level of intervention is at the operational one, with the establishment of the mutual guarantee company. And the last part is the financial level, with the creation of a guarantee fund in which SMEs will take part themselves. So that 4 pillars bring together all the actors that works to improve the development and the funding of SMEs. And the process in the mutual guarantee fund goes from the technical assistance to SMEs through the training managers and staff upgrading of enterprises to the certification of process and products and services. The second part of the process is the technical assistance to intermediary organizations like E.CAM or sectoral organization for the establishment of value chain supply and marketing network for goods and services. The third part is the support for the mutual guarantee fund to facilitate access to financing. And in that third part, we have other participants like the Cameroonian Bank for Small and Medium Enterprises. We have the Agency of Promotion for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. And we have other partners like European Union, who worked with us in the first experience in 2018, and who had found the training, the monitoring of the construction value chain actors. And the structuring of enterprises into value chains or sectors makes it possible to develop 2 complementary financing mechanisms. The first one is
Eric, can you please slowly round off? Sorry, just wanted to ask if you can start rounding off this.
Yes, it's the last point. It's the last point. Just to specify the two complementary mechanisms. So the first one is the financing external to the chain, and the second is the internal financing to the chain. So in the external financing, you have financial institutions as partners, and in the internal process, you have the bigger enterprises who support the smallest one. So this is the whole process that we are trying to implement in the new mutual guarantee fund in process.
Thank you very much, Eric. Just a question on sort of what COVID has changed, because these measures seem pertinent also without COVID. So can you say something about to what extent, I mean, what COVID has brought to how it influences this initiative?
Let's say that COVID just helped to accelerate the process because, as I said before, before COVID, our countries was already in a structural crisis. So we are trying now to develop the local production, and COVID just bring into the face of everybody the urgency to develop the local production, and the process that we have suggested through the mutual guarantee company has been adopted by the government and the development partners. So we are expecting to go further than we have prospect at the beginning.
Yes, there was just one question for clarification from one of the participants in terms, you mentioned the sovereign guarantee fund and the mutual guarantee fund. In my understanding, this was the same, but maybe I'm wrong. So if you could clarify, is this the same thing, or are these two different things?
Yes, we have in the main organization is the cooperative company. So in the cooperative company, you have the mutual guarantee fund in which SMEs contribute themselves. And the government should improve that mutual guarantee fund with a foreign guarantee. This is signature engagement, and should also add a cash contribution. So what we are asking now is first a sovereign guarantee, just a signing engagement, because we are all conscious that there is no cash for the moment. But the goal now is to build the trust, a trust network between small and medium-sized enterprises and financial institutions. And it's not possible if doesn't participate with a sovereign guarantee fund. A sovereign guarantee. Sorry.
Thank you very much. A last question is related to what you said in the beginning about in Cameroon, as in many other countries, the informal sector being quite substantial. To what extent
yes.
that does the initiative sort of target informal companies or take that into account? Can you say a bit more about that?
Our main goal in the process of a mutual guarantee company is to bring SMEs from the informal sector to formal sector. Many of them are focusing on financial issues. So we are convinced that if we resolve the financial issue by putting in place a mutual guarantee fund with other financial partners like SME banks here, for example, they will be ready to participate in that process, because what they are running from is the tax pressure. So it's the reason why many of SMEs prefer working in the informal sector, but now they don't have any technical assistance as training, as monitoring, as coaching, so they cannot develop their activities. So we are trying, as it is a sector that employs more than 90% of working population. We are expecting that it will help to develop decent employees and to develop also the capacity of tax contribution for the government.
Thank you very much, Eric. We have one or two other questions that, if we have time at the end, we can still tackle. But I want to move on because I also want to give time to the other two speakers still left. And this is actually somebody from the same continent and also from the private sector. Ms. Carole Karuga, who is CEO of the Kenyan Private Sector Association, KEPSA, who has engaged strongly with the government and with sort of strong proposals from them and their members on what's needed in response to COVID economic and to some extent health challenges, proposing a recommendation matrix and engaging with the government on this. And not limited to, but also covering small and medium enterprises, which Ms. Karuga's short presentation will focus on. So, Ms. Karuga, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jeske, and then good afternoon or good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. So I'll run very fast so that at least, because some of the ideas have been covered by others. But let me just introduce to you KEPSA, Kenya Private Sector Alliance, is an umbrella body of the private sector in Kenya. And our membership is business associations, corporates, SMEs and startups, multinationals and trade unions. And so those cover a lot of our membership. And then we are organized around different sectors that mirror the government so that we engage on advocacy work through the public-private dialogue that we use. Moving on. Next, okay. Oops, I think it's moved to someone else. It's there, thank you. And so what we've done is establish different platforms, what we call the public-private dialogue platforms, with the highest platform being the Presidential Roundtable that we engage at least once or twice a year. And then we do have a cabinet roundtable. And then we have what we call the ministers, the different ministers forums. We do engage with Parliament, also through the Speakers Roundtable. We do engage with counties. We have 47 counties as a country. We also do engage with the Chief Justice because of commercial law and matters related to business that are in the judiciary. And then also selected state agencies and development partners. And then, of course, at Regional Forum, where we engage under the East African Business Council. And now we are gearing up to Africa Continental Trade Free Area and how we're going to start engaging on that. So that's really how we engage with the government on matters concerning the business environment. And so what we did when COVID was starting to move from China and to Europe, and we started looking and saying, what does that mean for us as business? And because we realized, I mean, the world is very globally connected now, and no one is living on their own. And for that reason, we did a first survey that looked at how business was starting to be affected, and 61% at that point, in the early days, even before we had any reported case in Kenya, 61% said they were already starting to feel the effect because of imports and exports and that. And so what we did, we developed what we called a KEPSA economic management framework for COVID response. And our overriding focus was to how do we maintain jobs and livelihoods, even as business slows down, prioritize the health and safety of our employees, communities, and health workers, and then protecting SMEs, which is the topic for today. ensuring business and supply chain continuity, mobilizing private sector capabilities and resources to be able to engage on the impact, the effect of COVID, maintaining highest ethical standards so that we continue to ensure that at this time we are also maintaining ethical standards, avoiding moral hazard traps such as price spikes, producing or distributing lower quality goods, because that can happen when there's a crisis. People start supplying low quality goods and or the demand really outstrips the supply and we start having very expensive goods. So we really wanted to monitor that because it's a crisis that was affecting everyone, then disseminating clear and accurate information frequently and more, promoting social stability. So as we looked at, in essence, what we said, we're going to try and look at it in one line, lives and livelihoods. You know, on the health side was the lives, and then livelihoods was the economic side. And so because we have all the sectors, including the health sector, then we're going to engage that and see how we do that. Hang on. Next. And so on the SME focus, which I mentioned among the others, some of the areas that we looked at was tax measures, credit access and liquidity, business opportunities, engagement platform and information. And with that, we engaged government as well as other businesses, whether it's the banks and all that. And what we got back from engagement with government was the turnover tax was reduced from 3% to 1%. VAT was reduced from 16% to 14%. So this is for everyone, but at least it's also affecting SMEs. So some of these, when I mentioned them, they're not only SMEs focused, but again, they include SME. Corporate tax from 30% to 25%, and pay as you earn from 30% to 25%, and 100% waiver for those earning what we'd call Kenya shillings and lower, which is about $200 per month. And then on the credit access, a credit scheme guarantee for SMEs was set up for 3 billion Kenya shillings, and then a payment of pending bills and VAT refunds, payment of pending bills, because a lot of VAT SMEs also supply to government, and government has been owing a lot of businesses in general a lot of money, but that was also affecting SMEs. And VAT refunds, because a lot of SMEs part of the value chains of the big companies, and so when the big companies don't get their VAT refunds, it also affects the value chains where the SMEs are. Reduced the central bank rate to from 7% to 4.5%, just to be able for people to borrow. The banks could also reduce their credit rate. Loan restructure and suspension of this is the credit rating bureau listing for this period, so that even if you default on your loan, you're not the banks would not put you under the credit default rating bureau listing. And then on the business opportunities, we started looking at local content, and we have had a policy that has been running for a while, but just not implemented as much as it should. It's called Buy Kenya, Build Kenya. And so there's a big push right now on that, because as global supply chains have slowed down, we needed to look internally and say, how do we continue to make sure that people can produce and people can be able to get the goods and services they have gotten even from exports and imports. And then production of essential goods. We moved a lot of our factories, moved to producing the PPEs. This is the health essentials. We moved a lot of our SMEs many of them were doing either or involved in small manufacturing of food or supply of food or furniture, just small areas. But now they moved a lot more to supplying, to producing some of these essential goods in the health, supply of labor and construction materials. About 250,000 desks and hospital beds have been supplied by the SMEs. And then 3 billion Kenya shillings was also put in as part of farm inputs, and 200,000 to 200,000 small-scale farmers, which are SMEs. And then engagement platform information. So we the engagement economic management framework that I mentioned. That's what we use to engage on those areas that I'd mentioned earlier. Then we also set up a call center and an information portal, so that everyone, our businesses could call at any time, could go to the information portal and get as much as information as possible, ask questions, do business, link up with supply chains locally and all that. Then we've also developed what are called protocols of reopening of the economy. And even though Kenya never really closed, what we had was a cessation of movement from the capital city to the second capital city, because that's where most of the cases are. And so that it doesn't affect most of the rest of the country. So at some point, there was cessation of movement, but also there's been a night curfew for about more than a month, about 42 days. We had it for 7 p.m. to 5 a.m., but now it's been moved to 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. for another 30 days. And so what we're doing is saying when 30 days are come the end around 5th of July, the chances are that curfew will be lifted, cessation will be moved, but how do we make sure that we contain the virus? And so what we've done is develop protocols for all the different sectors alongside with government on how that they'll continue to operate so that we continue to contain the virus, but at the same time not stress out the economy. Next. And so the opportunities to support SMEs during COVID-19 pandemic is development of a recovery strategy for SMEs, which we are working on, affordable financing. I've mentioned the credit line, but also we are looking at different other opportunities, even in the private sector, support to access and adopt technology. So what we've done is also getting some of our digital e-commerce companies to start linking them up with the SMEs so that they can also do a lot of their sales and buying online now that there's less movement of people, whether in country or outside the country. Market linkages, so we're doing a lot of market linkages now of them and other manufacturers and other businesses, but also other among themselves. Capacity development programs, looking at, so I said about the beds they have produced for hospitals and all that, but how do we make sure that they are making quality products and all that? So we are working with different organizations on capacity development programs and support informalization. A lot of our SMEs are in the informal sector. And so it's to help them also formalize, because then it's easy to reach them, you know where they are, and they can be supported much better, even in terms of finance and all that, when they are formalized than when they're in informal sector. Okay, I think that's it from me. And yeah, so unless there are questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Karuga. It was very clear and interesting how you present this rich set of proposals and measures taken, actually, and how you engage with the government. If you could extend maybe a little bit on you, one of the things you presented was what was called Buy Kenya, Build Kenya, where you said this was already there in terms of promoting local content, but it's just the COVID and has actually pushed us to do more on this. Could you give an example of what this entails, or how is that sort of local content promoted? If you could say a bit more about that.
So a lot of the products that were being imported, so now with the disruption of the global supply chains, they're not coming in. And so the idea is to say, these are some of the products that we are getting from other countries, so let's start producing them here. What support do the SMEs need? What support do other companies need to be able to produce them here? And so using that policy that was already in place of Buy Kenya, Build Kenya, and getting more and more of the private sector to produce more, now it's become more emphasized. And then also what we call the local content, where even we're working with other maybe foreign companies to make sure that whatever they're doing in terms of contracts and all that, they include a percentage of Kenyan companies, so that we can build the capacity of the Kenyan companies, but also so that that whole idea of Buy Kenya, Build Kenya. So you're able to see a product to see that yes, it was made by whatever multinational, but in partnership or in joint venture with this kind of Kenyan company. So that's really where we are at. So that's a big push.
There is one question which is related from the audience, from the participants, on if this is in specific sector that local content is promoted and if there is a legal obligation, a local content obligation in those sectors.
Yes, there's a law in Kenya, just that it was never pushed that much. Every contract or procurement in the country, whether it's a road, a bridge, or whatever, it should have at least a minimum of 25% local, actually 30% local content. But sometimes it was never always so emphasized. But what this period has done is go back to that law and pull it out and say, now can we really emphasize on this law? Yeah. So there's a legal obligation that was there, just that it wasn't being as emphasized as before.
Thank you. Thank you. This is helpful. We have another question from a participant, which relates to your remark that there's support to market linkages. I thought it was also interesting because you're talking about linkages between also smaller and larger firms. And the question is if you could expand a bit on how you're going to support, or how the support is going to look like to support SMEs with market linkages, especially with the changing dynamics of the international markets. And is there anything that's special which is done now that's different than the norm than was done before?
What we're doing a lot more now that was not happening a lot is a market the products that are coming from SMEs, so that big companies and others can know that they're there. And I'll give you a good example. We had an innovation, which is a broad concept somewhere. I mean, it's already there in the internet, but they improved it on making a seat that can be a seat or a seat and a bed and a table together, depending on how you open it. And what we just did is pick it up, put it out there online and everything, and that has moved. There are even orders now coming from all the way from South Africa and other places. So it's just not marketing that in country, but it's also helping them to market internationally. And so that's what is changing, that we're now being more aggressive about marketing the products from SMEs, pushing government bodies and offices that are charged to marketing Kenyan products to include a lot more products. What government is going to be doing, they're going to be issuing also a list of products that they'll be buying from the SMEs in another couple of weeks. So that will be published, and that will also help the SMEs to know what to produce, because they will be a ready market. So the market is just not in the private sector or in the public, but also government is going to be doing that more.
Thank you very much. I want to move to the next speaker, who is Emmanuel Moyart, who, as I said in the beginning, is the team leader of working for DAI as a team leader of the facility in the European Commission, DEFCO specifically, on trade and private sector facility, which supports EU delegations in their private sector development support. And Emmanuel, can you give some examples of some of the things the EU delegations, the European Commission has been doing in response to COVID, with taking particularly as an example Uganda and Tunisia? The floor is yours.
Yes, thanks, Jeske. Hi to the more than 100 viewers we have today, I think. So very quickly, yes, I will tell a little bit about two examples, but also the work we do as a TPSD facility is work with the headquarters. And obviously, in a nutshell, we support the headquarters with DEFCO, headquarters with everything that has to do with trade and private sector development, which has become a very central focus of development aid recently, with a focus on SDGs and obviously the role that the private sector has to play if we want to reach the SDGs. So therefore, our focus is on how to engage with the private sector more and in a better way. So this is what we do on a permanent basis. Obviously, when the crisis came up, when we have this COVID crisis coming up, we immediately focused very much on what to do in these times of COVID, and we produced a publication which is called Private Sector Engagement in COVID-19 Times, which basically highlighted for the delegations, because everything we produce at the end of the day goes to the delegations and helps them decide, helps them focus, program, and orient their programming more towards, or in a way that facilitates the private sector work for development, of course, because that's our end goal. So in this publication on PSE, Private Sector Engagement in COVID times, we identify the role of the private sector, both as an element of response to the crisis. So for instance, providing masks if they produce something related like fabric or something, or providing logistics, truck companies that can provide logistics to move health material around, or websites or more IT infrastructure. So we highlighted that so as to point maybe some of the dialogue by the delegations toward the private sector for immediate support, but also, of course, we highlighted all the issues that the private sector would face with the crisis, during the crisis, but also, of course, after the crisis, because we know that we're bound for a very serious economic crisis. And therefore, we wanted to just make sure that in everything that is going on in terms of providing of support, that the delegations were aware of all the different elements that the private sector would be facing. And for that, we discussed with a number of, for instance, with KEPSA. We had an ongoing dialogue with KEPSA from here, from the headquarters, and they helped us identify, they provided us a number of frameworks and a number of questionnaires, for instance, for the private sector, so that it could help the delegations in understanding, examining and understanding the needs of the private sector so that the support could be provided to them. And I'll go back after the example. So for instance, next slide, please. We have identified in Tunisia, there is a program, an ongoing program with a regional development institution, which is a state institution, and the delegation is providing support to that program. And in this support, within this support, what they did was to create a cash transfer program for MSMEs. So very specifically only for the least developed regions, for companies that have less than 10 employees that pledge to maintain job, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a maximum of 10,000 per company. So this is a kind of thing that could be done. And that is my point. It could happen because the delegation already had this program ongoing with this institution and had already understood and had already approached the issues of the private sector. We have an even more, clear example in the next slide, which is about Uganda. In Uganda, there is a very interesting, the EU delegation in Uganda has set up a very interesting framework called SB4U, Sustainable Business for Uganda, which is basically working on all the elements that will help the private sector develop and thrive, which is on the one hand, providing support in terms of investment. So there is a fund, an investment fund called the Yield Uganda Investment Fund, which is done with local and international donors together with the European Commission. And they're providing loans to SMEs. So they already have these loans and they're renegotiating now the loans so as to make it easier for the SMEs to repay in these times of crisis. But they worked on the investment side, but they also worked very much on the public-private dialogue, on the dialogue side. And they work with the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, PSFU, which would be an equivalent to the previous presentations, two presentations we had from Cameroon and from Kenya. So these are institutions that gathers everything around the private sector. So working with the PSFU, what we did was to try and speed up the implementation, for instance, of the TA that is provided to SMEs, and in particular in one area, which is tourism. Of course, tourism is absolutely key in Uganda. And for tourism, I just had the very, very latest news, the plan is to work together with the Uganda Development Bank so as to provide grants together with loans. So the bank would provide the loans and the Commission would put in some more money in as grants, and that would be for SMEs that would be committed to keep, not to fire, because as you know, tourism is seasonal as well. So you tend to hire and then fire and hire again. In this particular case, because of this, what we want those companies so that they can benefit from this bona fide loans which have a grant component from the Commission, is to keep jobs, one, and second, also to pay their taxes. So there is an agreement also with the Uganda Tax Revenue Authority, so to make sure that things keep going. So not only for the businesses, but also at the end of the day, also for the state, because the businesses pay taxes and that helps the state function. So we are aware of this whole complexity of combining support to the private sector, but also being able to keep the state and the state budget also in a condition that will not have to be paid by the private sector in a later phase. So as a word of conclusion, not going much into the detail of these examples, but as a word of conclusion, what I want to say, and I think is important, is that from the donor perspective, of course, when you have this kind of event like COVID, you can react, you can provide some kind of immediate support, but it is not easy because a donor has procedures and needs to have programs. So it is important to have an ongoing work, a dialogue, but also work programs, project support ongoing with the private sector and with the intermediaries of the private sector, like KEPSA, for instance, or in Cameroon, so that whenever, first of all, we build the resiliency of the private sector, and we build the resilience of the institutions that support the private sector and that voice the concerns of the private sector to the government, but also to the financial sector. And when we have that, we can have, in a case of a crisis like we have right now with the COVID, we can have effective and fast reaction. And this is what we have seen with these two examples. These examples take place and happen because there is an ongoing dialogue with the private sector that helps identify and be able to immediately release the help and the support. That's it. Yes, sir. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for giving some very concrete examples of how the European Commission is trying to support in these times of the COVID crisis, and also the role of and the importance of engaging with the private sector. And I think for some of us who've heard quite a bit on the sustainable business for Africa, which is in Brussels talked quite a bit of. I think it's an interesting example of the sustainable business for Uganda, a concrete example of where, trying to promote policy dialogue for a more enabling environment for SMEs, MSMEs, and other companies. So quite enlightening. I have here a question from one of the participants who actually asked it even before you started speaking, so a very, really adamant on asking it, and it actually relates to your remark on some of the criteria that are used, namely also that in the tourism sector that companies keep their employees but also pay their taxes, which I thought was an interesting point. And this person asked more generally how companies, MSMEs, are selected. She specifies specifically for training and certification support, but she gave some examples also of other support. So if you can say a bit more on sort of selection criteria of these companies, and how does the EU delegation or the governmental institution make sure they pick the right ones for developmental impact?
Yes, I mean, this is an interesting question, and whenever I'm always asked this question when we do trainings on MSME. So what is an MSME and how we define it? And I think it is always I mean, there are World Bank definitions, IMF definitions, whatever you want, but at a local level, I think this is also part of the dialogue that must be had between public-private, between the government and between the private sector to identify how do we define precisely? How do we define what an MSME is? It's not only in terms of capital, it's not only in terms of turnover, it's in terms of employment, it's in terms of type of, width of market, for instance. So in this particular case, I know that in Uganda, you have a very specific definition that was set up between the government and the private sector, the PFSU, Federation of Uganda, so as to define the ranges for micro, small, and medium enterprise. And this is what is used with the present, I told you about providing interest-free loans. This is within a program that is already working with SMEs alongside the definition that was agreed before. So my recommendation, but I think that is the case in every country, is that it is very country dependent. I guess that my colleagues from the various programs we talked about will probably say the same, hopefully.
Thank you very much for responding to that question. I had another and a last question, I think, given the time, from a participant asking actually clarification on what you were saying on the UDB transaction in, again, Uganda. If she's understood correctly, that the grant of the EU is used to subsidize the interest rate of the loan. So if you can just explain sort of the mechanism that you. Thanks.
Yes, I just had the news like yesterday. So I'm not very sure about the modality. Maybe it could be used to reduce the interest rates. Indeed, maybe it could be used as a grant just besides the loan. So you would have a normal loan, but then you will have an additional grant that would help reduce the investment costs, for instance, so an investment grant. I don't know about this, but I guess any modality is workable. It all depends on how easy and how fast you can do it, because time is of the essence in this particular time. So it is, negotiations are ongoing for that. I know that the dialogue with the tourism sector is extremely important, and I don't want to say anything that is wrong, because maybe our colleagues in Uganda are watching, and I don't want to say anything that is not true. But of course, we can provide information to anyone that would like to know more when we have the actual procedure.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Maybe we have time for a very quick last question. Again, from one of the participants on matchmaking between SMEs and e-commerce service providers. If there are already examples of successful matchmaking, and if there's any feedback already from SMEs.
That's an interesting one. I have a counterexample of that, which is something that happened in South Africa. At some point, it didn't last long, but at some point the government wanted to close e-commerce so as to favor local businesses during the crisis, at the very beginning of the crisis when there was a lockdown. So that is something that obviously we need to give a thought about. I think, again, if we have an ongoing dialogue, e-commerce, now let's have a look at the positive side of a crisis, which is, as we all know, means opportunity. The fact that we have identified that, maybe at some point we need to go into a lockdown again, that can happen for many reasons, not only for health reasons. Let's try and develop the e-commerce locally as well. It is not that complicated. So we can have local produce and local products on the market also, and even open markets with that. E-commerce, by the way, is one of the areas where we focus a lot, and probably you at ECDPM as well.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And actually, this is a nice bridge to the next sessions, actually last two questions, one specifically on financing mechanisms, because we have in this series an upcoming webinar on finance, and there's another one, which is next week, on digitalization, which is obviously related to e-commerce. So it's actually a nice way to end this webinar. I would like to thank all the speakers. Thank you very much for your insights, but also all the participants. Thank you for being with us and for asking questions also on behalf of ECDPM and of DAI. Thank you very much, and we do hope that you will join us for one or more of the other webinars in this series. And on this, I wish you a very good afternoon and hopefully see you again. Thank you very much.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so who has a question? Who am I unmuting?
Monica?
But now, who is now in the call? There's Monica, but also others, no? Other participants who
Yeah,
are...
there are a few others, but I can unmute Monica. Okay, Monica,
then,
your audio is on.
But do we want others to be here?
Well, I can, hold on one second.
You're the panelist now if your audio is muted.